We have a ceasefire. Sort of. Day 41 of the unprecedented kinetic engagement known as Operation Epic Fury. The biggest geopolitical development on the board is a fragile 2-week operational pause announced. Make sure you are subscribed to Titan Mechanics and hit that bell icon so you never miss a critical military intel update. And let us know where you stand right now in the comments. Drop a 5 if you stand with the US. Press 6 if you back Iran. Or hit 7 if you just want peace. Now, let's look at the intel. Despite the high-level diplomatic ink drying on this ceasefire agreement, the reality on the ground remains highly volatile. Almost immediately after the operational pause was declared, Iran launched a wave of asymmetric loitering munitions directly at its Gulf partners. Now, from a tactical intelligence perspective, we have to ask why. It is highly probable that the stand-down orders simply never reached the isolated IRGC launch units. The Iranian command and control structure has been so thoroughly degraded by American air power that their internal communications currently possess the reliability of a drive-through speaker submerged in a fish tank. You have rogue drone operators sitting in a reinforced bunker, completely cut off from the outside world. They are not getting emails. They are not getting phone calls. They were just told that the deadline was 8 p.m. American stealth bombers were airborne, and they needed to launch everything they had left. There is essentially zero centralized leadership remaining to successfully broadcast a ceasefire directive. So, acting on outdated operational parameters, these isolated units launched their remaining kamikaze drones at energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But here is where the geopolitical calculus completely shifts. The Gulf states are no longer playing purely defensive roles. Almost immediately after those rogue drones breached their airspace, retaliatory kinetic strikes decimated Iranian targets on Lavan Oil Island. We do not have official Pentagon confirmation on which specific allied nation pulled the trigger, but whether it was the UAE or another strategic partner, the message was deafeningly clear. Arab nations are directly striking back at Iranian sovereign territory. Lavan Island is not a minor sandbar, it is a critical node in Tehran's petroleum export network. The Gulf partners essentially looked at the IRGC's rogue drone launch and responded by systematically dismantling a crown jewel of Iran's revenue generation. We are going to be breaking down the satellite telemetry of that specific strike shortly, but the underlying geopolitical strategy is obvious. The days of Tehran launching proxy attacks without suffering direct, catastrophic economic consequences on their own soil are officially over. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth provided a comprehensive briefing at the Pentagon that detailed the sheer scale of the American kinetic response leading up to this ceasefire. Hegseth confirmed that U.S. forces conducted a staggering 800 precision strikes in a single night. Let that number sink in. 800 individual targets neutralized in a matter of hours, specifically designed to permanently cripple Iran's military-industrial complex and completely shatter their leadership hierarchy. Hegseth systematically listed the senior regime officials who have been permanently removed from the battlefield. Statistically speaking, holding the title of Ayatollah or senior IRGC commander over the last 39 days has carried a life expectancy slightly lower than a snowball in a jet engine. The operational objective here is complete decapitation of the radical command structure. And frankly, if a new, pragmatic government does emerge from this rubble, hopefully it will abandon the incredibly bizarre aesthetic of having ancient clerics in robes orchestrating modern military strategy. The juxtaposition of conventional military officers standing at attention while a religious cleric dictates complex tactical operations aimed at destroying the US and Israel was always a recipe for logistical disaster. And Operation Epic Fury just proved exactly why. One technical detail from the Pentagon briefing that absolutely demands deeper analysis is the deployment of strategic heavy bombers. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs confirmed that the kinetic package included 18 distinct long-range bomber missions that required 3 zero-hour round trips originating directly from the continental United States. We are talking about B-2 Spirits taking off from Missouri, executing multiple mid-air refuelings over the Atlantic, penetrating deeply contested airspace halfway across the globe, delivering massive bunker-busting payloads with pinpoint accuracy and flying all the way back home without ever landing. That is a 30-hour commute just to absolutely ruin a foreign adversary's entire military infrastructure. There is not a single other nation on the planet that possesses that level of global strike logistics. It is the ultimate display of strategic deterrence. And this overwhelming projection of force perfectly sets the stage for the chaotic diplomatic theater playing out in Washington. President Trump is leaning heavily into his reputation as the ultimate geopolitical dealmaker, utilizing incredibly aggressive rhetoric to force Tehran to the negotiating table. This strategy triggered an absolute meltdown across the corporate media landscape over the last 48 hours. Just prior to the deadline, threatening the total destruction of Iran's energy infrastructure, the president posted a statement that had the entire global intelligence community holding its breath. He stated, and I quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen." Predictably, mainstream pundits completely lost their minds. They immediately spun the narrative that the commander-in-chief was threatening to literally eradicate 90 million Iranian civilians. If you intentionally stop reading after the first sentence, it certainly sounds apocalyptic. But from a purely military logistics standpoint, physically wiping out 90 million people would require the deployment of thousands of strategic nuclear yields, which is completely outside the parameters of conventional reality. The media intentionally ignored the second half of the statement, which provided the actual strategic context. The Post continued, "Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world, 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death, will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran." When you apply basic reading comprehension, it is blindingly obvious that the civilization he threatened to extinguish was not the civilian population, but the 7-year-old radical theocracy of the mullahs and the IRGC, an oppressive regime that has systematically neutralized tens of thousands of its own citizens. Human rights estimates place the regime's internal body count over the last few months alone anywhere from 15,000 to 45,000 neutralized dissidents. The administration's kinetic messaging was directed entirely at dismantling that specific corrupt apparatus, but the media cynically weaponized the rhetoric for clicks. This hysteria peaked on Easter Sunday, resulting in a highly publicized meltdown from political commentator Tucker Carlson. The president issued a stark warning, stating that if the Strait of Hormuz was not immediately reopened, it would be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up into one, punctuating the threat with an explicit F-bomb and sarcastically adding "Praise be to Allah." Carlson dedicated an entire segment to clutching his pearls, claiming the president was mocking Christians by using profanity and threatening infrastructure on a religious holiday. It was an astonishing display of performative outrage. We are in the middle of a massive global theater operation. The military-industrial complex does not pause for holidays. Furthermore, while the media was obsessing over a typed expletive, operators from the Joint Special Operations Command were executing one of the most daring, high-stakes hostage rescue missions in modern military history on that exact same Easter Sunday. That tactical insertion successfully extracted American assets and permanently neutralized over a dozen highly trained IRGC operatives in the process. Are we supposed to believe the JSOC operators should have holstered their weapons and allowed the IRGC to capture advanced American hardware simply because it was a Sunday? The tactical reality of an armed engagement is brutal and unforgiving, and prioritizing tone policing over strategic victory is a luxury reserved for television studios, not the battlefield. Meanwhile, the Iranian regime is desperately attempting to save face while simultaneously begging for a reprieve. The official statement from Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, was a masterclass in diplomatic cognitive dissonance. He thanked the prime ministers of Pakistan for their tireless efforts to end the war, desperately trying to frame the ceasefire as a mutual, brotherly negotiation rather than a total capitulation to American air power. The most hilarious line in the official dispatch was his declaration that our powerful armed forces will cease their defensive operations. It takes an astonishing level of delusion to boast about your powerful armed forces when 80% of your strategic military assets are currently smoking craters. Their advanced air defense grid was dismantled in 72 hours. Their naval assets are resting at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, and their command bunkers have been converted into subterranean skylights. But sure, the powerful forces are magnanimously choosing to pause operations. It is pure, unadulterated copium designed strictly for domestic propaganda. The reality of why Tehran accepted this ceasefire lies in the specific targets the U.S. military struck in the final 48 hours before the pause. It was a calculated demonstration of absolute economic control. American stealth platforms specifically targeted military nodes on Karg Island. However, they deliberately avoided annihilating the massive oil export terminals that fund the entire regime. It was the geopolitical equivalent of a warning shot. Washington demonstrated that they could instantly turn off Iran's primary revenue stream to China at any moment, but chose to leave it intact solely as leverage for the ceasefire. The IRGC operates like a heavily armed mafia syndicate. If you permanently sever their cash flow, the entire organization implodes from within. The Pentagon also authorized devastating kinetic payloads against the South Pars petrochemical complex. Critics immediately decried the targeting of civilian energy infrastructure, completely ignoring the fact that the South Pars facility serves as the primary power generation hub for Iran's clandestine ballistic missile development program. Every single strike was surgically tied to degrading Iran's capacity to wage war. When Allied forces leveled specific facilities at Sharif University, international observers panicked, claiming the military was targeting academic agriculture research. Let me be very clear. Unless their agricultural curriculum involved strapping explosive payloads to tractors to study the aerodynamic properties of kamikaze drones, that university was operating as a highly classified R&D nerve center for the Shahed drone program. The strikes were absolutely methodical. The United States executed over 10,000 distinct combat sorties, delivering kinetic payloads to over 13,000 hardened targets. The sheer scale of this logistical operation has rendered the Iranian military completely combat ineffective for decades. Furthermore, U.S. Central Command recently released declassified satellite imagery of the Shahed Naval Boatyard in Bushehr. This facility was the primary manufacturing hub for the asymmetric fast-attack craft the IRGC uses to harass commercial shipping. The before and after photos show a sprawling industrial complex completely reduced to ash. The Pentagon didn't just sink their boats, they systematically eradicated Iran's physical capacity to ever build them again. This is what overwhelming strategic deterrence looks like, and the pressure is not letting up. CENTCOM released footage of sailors aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln actively maintaining arresting wires on the flight deck during the ceasefire. The carrier strike group is not standing down, they are not relaxing, and they are fully prepared to resume launch operations the millisecond Tehran violates the terms of this agreement. The ultimate question now is whether this 2-week tactical pause will transition into a permanent strategic realignment. We are watching a high-stakes game of geopolitical 4D chess. Will the remnants of the Iranian regime honor the framework, or was this ceasefire merely an act of pure desperation to delay their inevitable destruction? Furthermore, will this agreement officially sever the financial pipelines to Iran's regional proxy armies? Eradicating Tehran's domestic military is a massive victory, but the ultimate goal is ensuring that Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis suddenly find their operational credit cards violently declined. If we are truly dealing with a newly pragmatic regime that recognizes the death to America doctrine is a guaranteed suicide pact, we might actually witness the total collapse of their proxy network. It is a fragile, highly volatile situation that could instantly erupt back into a massive kinetic engagement. As a reminder, all tactical analysis and intelligence provided on Titan Mechanics is strictly for educational and documentary purposes. We analyze geopolitical strategy and military hardware based on publicly available open-source data. We do not glorify conflict or incite real-world action. Stay informed. Stay analytical. And we will see you on the next briefing.